Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Business Builders Show. My name is Marty Wolf, and I am your host for the Business Builders Show. And if you're looking on a screen, you'll see Mr. Joe Keohane is with me. Hi, Joe. How are you, sir?
Marty, I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing fantastic. If I read the book, I should say something like, well, Joe, I'm a 9, and after this interview, I'll be a 10. How
Good.
was that? Does that
I
prove that I read the book?
I'm glad you have faith in my ability to bring you up a rung, and it definitely demonstrates that you've read the book, which is more than I can say for a lot of people I've spoken to. So thank you for doing your due diligence here, Marty.
You bet. So, a lot to talk about. First, I want to give a shout out to Jason Feifer of Entrepreneur Magazine, who connected us. So I always like to mention that. It was so nice of them. And I also, before I do your formal introduction, I want to congratulate you, Joe, on being recommended in the next Big Idea Club with Adam Grant and Daniel Pink and a whole lot of famous folks. So congratulations on that. That should sell some books for you, man.
Yeah, we hope so. We hope so. But it's definitely an honor. It was pretty cool when they told us about that. It's great.
Yeah, that's the big leagues. So you're there, Joe. So let me formally introduce Joe Keohane. I'm taking it right from the back of his book. He is a veteran journalist who has held high-level editing positions at Medium, Esquire, Entrepreneur, and Hemisphere. His writing on everything from politics to travel to social science, business, and technology has appeared in New York Magazine, the Boston Globe, the New Yorker, Wired, Boston Magazine, and the New Republic. He wrote a great book that we've been alluding to. It is called The Power of Strangers: The Benefits of Connecting in a Suspicious World. So there's the title. I want to point out something, or I want you to be thinking about through this whole interview, folks, because I want to make sure this point gets made. I circled the word benefits, the power of strangers, the benefits of connecting in a suspicious world. So, Joe, I'm going to put you on the spot right away. In the prologue of the book, you say, the fact is, in America anyway, we simply cannot stand the sight of one another. Well, I think that needs some explanation. So
Sure.
go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I'm mostly referring to politics, the kind of political state in the U.S. right now, with the
Okay.
hyperpartisanship, and
All right.
what partisanship is, what hyperpartisanship is, and hyperpolarization is is a form of dehumanization. There's a lot of research that backs this up that shows that when people are in a hyperpartisan atmosphere, when there is a time when they're really polarized, they tend not to really consider the other side to be fully human in the way that they are human. We tend to attribute,
Mm,
like less intelligence to them. We tend to think they have less willpower. They're less individual than we are. Whereas our side obviously has very vibrant minds and we're super smart and savvy and everything. The other ones are just kind of witless cogs in this big partisan machine. So when
yeah.
people, and that's accelerated under conditions of hyperpartisanship, and when people are in that sort of mindset, and they don't have personal contact, they don't have like in-person contact with members of this other group, it allows that sort of misperception to go unchecked and get wildly out of control. And we see it in America now. There's this
Yeah.
phenomenon called the big sort, where Democrats and Republicans no longer even share the same geographical space, so they can go through much of their lives
Yeah.
without ever encountering someone who occupies the different side of the aisle, and that accelerates dehumanization, and it allows stereotypes to run unchecked. Whereas we know now from like a growing body of research that when you do have contact between members of different groups, it helps us humanize each other. It helps us understand each other. It helps us find a way to cooperate with one another. But staying separate is actually kind of a catastrophe for politics and for societies. So that's what I mean. I mean, we don't, people harbor
Yeah.
completely inaccurate perceptions of what the other side is actually like. And there's been some interesting polling research on this too, just overestimating how rich they are, how poor they are, how Christian they are, how atheistic they are, whatever. We have wildly exaggerated and wildly
Yeah.
negative perceptions of other people. So that's what I mean. I mean, politics has turned us into strangers. Politics and distance, I'd say, have turned countrymen into strangers.
Yeah. You mentioned the word research in your response to that question. And folks, I want to tell you that this is a 300 and some pages, this book, and the research behind it is just incredible. Obviously, Joe is a writer, but I love it when I see the number of people that he's talked to, the research that he's done, the studies he's looked at worldwide. By the way, I want to make sure that people know that he's talked to people from all over the world. So um, it's broken down into three parts also. And the first part that we'll talk about now is what happens when we talk to strangers. And so, talk to me about your experience with Georgie at Trigger Conversations. And that was in London, I think, correct?
Yeah, she's in London. So yeah, to back up a little bit, I wanted to understand what the possible benefits are of talking to strangers, and I wanted to attack it from every possible angle. And I also wanted to understand everything that keeps us from doing it, and that can range from like telling kids that everyone they don't know is dangerous to even things like urban design, population density. There's all these things that keep us from talking to each other. But for the positive benefits, we're seeing fairly recently, it's only over the last 15 years that psychologists started studying what happens when we talk to strangers, which is funny
Hmm.
because we've been living with strangers for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And only recently have
Yes.
people started to look into like what complicates these interactions and what good they might do. So there's a woman named Gillian Sandstrom who, along with a few other psychologists, have been doing this research. And what they've found is that, regardless of age, regardless of gender, in some cases, regardless of race or ethnicity, people who talk to strangers, or people, or should rather say, study participants who are sent out to talk to strangers, think it's going to be a disaster. They think the people are going to reject them. They think they're not allowed to do it. They're going to make fools of themselves. We have all these. They think they might be putting themselves in danger. We have all these very intense pessimistic hangups over whether or not we can talk to a stranger and how it can go. So they studied a lot of that, but then they also studied what happened when people went out into the world to do this, to talk to people on mass transit, to talk to people in a coffee shop, whatever, out in public. And
Right.
what they found overwhelmingly, and really overwhelmingly, I mean, it wasn't just like 51 to 49, is that people who engaged in these interactions were coming back and reporting that they felt happier, they felt more connected to the places where they lived, they felt even more optimistic, maybe more trusting. There are tons of benefits associated with this, and it makes sense when you think about what a human is. A human is a hypersocial creature. So we need to socialize. We need to have that social connection. It's not like a new agey thing. It's actually a very practical requirement for remaining healthy as a human being. So we know that,
Sure.
interactions with people we know and love, friends and family, those are really important, probably the most important. But what the research is showing us is that even these little passing interactions, even a pleasant chat with the bus driver, even like talking for a minute with the kid at the coffee shop, those carry real benefits. And those benefits can really address some of the more pressing social problems that we face, from loneliness to political polarization, which we can get into later. So, after I discovered all this stuff and I talked to a lot of these psychologists who are fantastic too, they were great. I wanted to understand how I could get better at it. So I come from Boston. I come
Hmm.
from very chatty people. My parents are notorious for just chatting with people everywhere they go. And I've watched that my whole life. And I've seen them well into their 70s at this point continue to actually make new friends, which is that's like a life goal. That's a pretty great way to live.
Sure.
And for me,
Yeah.
I was always pretty good about it, but I'm also a journalist, so I talk to strangers all the time. But I found a few years ago that I had stopped doing it. I just wasn't. I was like doing the self checkout thing at the supermarket. Like I found myself withdrawing from the public, from strangers, and I wanted to understand why.
Sure.
And the
Sure.
reason why was basically that like I was just really busy with a hard job as an editor, and I had a young kid, so I was like exhausted. I was stretched thin. I didn't have any spare time anymore, and I withdrew, and I started feeling kind of self conscious about it, and that made it worse. So I wanted to get back into it. I knew what the benefits were. I knew the benefits personally because I had experienced them myself over the course of my life, and I wanted to rebuild myself as a social creature. So this woman, Gillian Sandstrom, who's the psychologist at the University of Essex, who's marvelous, she introduced me to a woman named Georgie Nightingale, who, as you said, is the founder of a group called Trigger Conversations in London. And I got in touch with Georgie, and Georgie told me that she was going to actually do a class on talking to strangers, where she was going to have a weekend class, and there were going to be
Hmm.
students were going to come, and there were people who wanted to learn to be social, to be like fluid, to be like socially adept, right? To learn to be the kind of person who can just kind of get into any situation and connect quickly and
Right.
make friends and all that stuff. So I bought a plane ticket and I flew to London and I took the class, and she was fantastic. She was really smart, really practical. She had gone deep into the research. The other students were, frankly, pretty shy, ranging from like merely introverted to like deeply shy. And they wanted to do this. They
Yeah.
wanted to learn how to get good at this. And one of them had a really poignant line that I loved. He was a kid who'd grown up on a farm and recently moved to London and was like, kind of daunted by how big the city was and just wanted to engage, wanted to get the most out of life. And he felt that if he learned to talk to strangers,
Yeah.
it would give him the ability to travel, the ability to see the world, which is really
Mhm.
great. Like
Right.
and when you do that, you can travel literally and you can travel figuratively by meeting people and learning about people and being challenged and all that stuff. So Georgie had some fantastic pointers on what to do, how to do it. And I'll give you, the one that you mentioned a little earlier to me was this. There's this idea of scripts. So when you're out in the world, say you're in a store or something, and you're talking to the cashier, and the cashier says, "How you doing?" And you say, "I'm doing fine. How are you?" And they say, "I'm fine." And no one cares, and no one's actually listening, and no information has been exchanged. Right? Like you're barely there. And we do that
Yeah.
all the time because it's sort of more
Yeah.
polite than not saying anything, but it's not a real conversation and it's not a real connection. So Georgie recommended breaking those scripts that we find ourselves falling into. So when you get into a situation where you're talking to a waiter or you're talking to a cashier or something, and they ask you how you doing, actually answer the question. So don't just say I'm fine, how are you? Because that's a sign to them that you're not listening and you're not willing to engage. But what Georgie does is she says you have to answer with sincerity and specificity. So sincere in the sense that you're given a real answer that you're actually thinking about for a second. In specificity, in the
Yeah.
sense that I'll give you her great tip is answer numerically. So when someone says how you doing, she'll say, well, I'll say I'm about a 6 out of 10 today. And I've done that a lot of times, and it's incredibly effective
Yeah.
because it signals to the person that you're actually
Yeah.
having a conversation, right? Like something else is happening here. This
Right.
person is actually here with me, like looking at me. They gave me an answer that's kind of audacious and kind of clever. And maybe you say
Yeah.
a little bit why
Yeah.
you're a 6 out of 10, and then you ask them how they are. And, honestly, 9 times out of 10, they'll give you a numerical answer back. And now there's kind of this playful dynamic happening. And Georgie recommends just saying, if they say I'm an 8 out of 10, say, what'll it take to get you to a 9? And then maybe they tell you a little bit about their day, or maybe you learn about a hobby or something. It doesn't have to go on for longer than like the time
Yeah.
of the transaction, but you'll get a little connection there. And maybe you learn something and maybe you have a laugh or whatever it is. But the research is showing that though even an interaction as slight as that can be really powerful, can be really helpful. And it's much easier to do than people expect, I think, or at least a lot of people expect.
Yeah. Does it not isn't there science backing up that you actually feel better as a result of doing those things? And you point that out in the book.
Yeah, you really do, and that was part of the riddle or part of the puzzle I wanted to solve. Before I pitched this book, I was just thinking about this a lot, and I had a conversation with Alan Alda, the actor, the guy from
Sure.
MASH, who's Alda
Sure.
runs like a nonprofit that teaches scientists and technologists to speak to normal human beings. So he's like a communications guru, and he's great at it. And that organization's great. But he and I were talking about talking to strangers too, and both of us agreed that there was this sense of relief that we felt after like it went well. Like not overwhelming, but like it felt kind of relief, it felt kind of calm, it felt kind of good. And I wanted to understand what that was. And I think part of it, at least as far as I was able to determine and do in the book, part of it is a question of expectations. We're very pessimistic about what the odds are that a conversation with a stranger is going to go well, and that's for a lot of reasons. So when it goes reasonably well, like when the person doesn't attack us, we're like, sweet, that was great. That was way better than I thought it was going to be. So there's a little relief there. But there's also the
Yeah.
possibility that something's happening on a biochemical level that I thought was pretty intriguing. Oxytocin is the chemical that our body creates that facilitates bonding. So, like when a mother is not nursing her baby, her brain generates oxytocin, and it
Yeah.
bonds you to the
Yeah.
person that you're having this experience with. And it's also like a relaxant. So when the body creates oxytocin, you feel calm. You might feel something that almost feels like relief. So I was talking to a leading expert on oxytocin in Georgia, and he was just saying, they haven't done research on this in a laboratory setting, but he was like, yeah, it would make sense that if you had a meaningful interaction with a stranger, and again, it doesn't have to go on forever, but like one of those like kind of flashes of connection you have sometimes, sometimes you're even
Sure.
on like a
Yeah.
plane or something and you have an amazingly great conversation with someone. That might generate oxytocin. So the relief might actually be happening on a biochemical level. Which is really interesting. And that tells you
Yeah.
that, like, we are wired to a pretty great degree to form connections with other people,
Yeah.
because that's the secret of humanity's success is that we're very good at cooperating with strangers in a way that you don't really see in the natural world.
And we have become, when I sent you an email over the weekend, just a reminder that you're coming on, and I said, well, reminder that you're coming on, but your book somewhat humbled me, because as you indicated at the beginning, I too have fallen into that trap, and I think I'm a pretty decent guy, but I too have fallen into that trap, and I've already started to practice. And how many of us in the professional world, especially, can attest to the fact that we had a casual encounter? We said something nice, or somebody said something nice to us, and that turned into a lifetime, or maybe not a lifetime, but a valuable relationship, professionally or personally, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I get those stories all the time. And there's
Yeah.
there's definitely a really strong business case to be made for doing this stuff, obviously. And everybody knows networking is a big deal, but networking goes beyond like connecting on LinkedIn. It's
Oh,
really
yeah.
valuable for a business person to develop the skill of talking to strangers. Number one, because business is social, right? Like
Yeah.
socializing is business, business is socializing to a certain extent. But also because it just gains you access to more perspectives in a
Oh,
really
yeah.
useful way. So if you have an idea for a product or a service or whatever it is, you can go kind of test that out in the field by just talking to people. And you don't know what you don't know. And by talking to as many people as possible, you will be awakened
So
to your
true.
blind spots. You'll get better ideas. You'll get pushback that might be really, it might be uncomfortable, but it might be really beneficial to whatever you're trying to do. And then just being able to make a connection with people
Heck
quickly
yeah.
is really key for business people as well.
Absolutely. So, folks, you're listening to the Business Builder Show. My guest is Joe Keohane. I'm your host, Marty Wolf. We are talking about Joe's book, The Power of Strangers, the benefits of connecting in a suspicious world. I keep want to use the word benefits because there are so many in this book. Yes, I'm promoting the hell out of Joe's book. I want you to buy it. I want you to listen carefully to this interview. Okay, I'm going to wander around a little bit, but again, I'll ask questions. You can answer them, not ask them, answer them. You can go any way you want. But I want to talk about. I hope you do want to talk about Ben Mathis, Mathes, and something you experienced called free listening. That was fascinating.
That
Talk to
was
me about that.
Yeah, so that was it was fascinating and it was a weird and kind of great experience. And also something that I think I say as a journalist, all journalists should do that, but I think all business people should try to do that too, because it's really good training. But so I heard about Ben Mathis, who runs an organization called Urban Confessional. And what Urban Confessional is, maybe 10 years old or something at this point. It's getting pretty big now. It's in 50 countries, I think. What Urban Confessional does is they have volunteers stand in pairs on street corners with like crude homemade cardboard signs that say free listening on them. And all these people do is they stand there and they allow people to come up and talk to them. And it sounds extremely uncomfortable and it sounds really weird. And I read about it and I was like, even by my standards, this might be a little odd, but I want to go check it out. So I went out to LA to go spend some time with Ben Mathis, the founder of the organization. And I wanted to do it just because you see testimonies from people and they say it's really profound and it's really poignant. It's really beautiful and powerful. And I was like, all right, I'll take the ride. So I go out there, and the secret of Urban Confessional, besides just the willingness to stand in the street and be like vulnerable, right? I'm pretty easily embarrassed. So it was like, the prospect is mortifying to me. Like standing out there advertising myself like that is something that I am in no way comfortable with.
Yeah.
So I go have breakfast with Ben and we hang out for a while. And then we go take to a street corner in East Los Angeles and we have our sign. And people just start coming up to you and they're curious about it because it is a really curious thing. It's really unusual. You don't see things like this. And the methodology that Ben
No.
developed to allow people to do this, the secret of it is something that he calls imbalanced conversation. And imbalanced conversation means that only talk about yourself 20% of the time and make sure that you're talking about the other person or the
Mm.
other person is talking about themselves 80% of the time to get them comfortable, to let them know that you're actually listening to them. And this isn't one of those things where you're listening for 2 seconds for something that you're interested in, then you're going to like run away with the conversation, right? Which is what everyone does. A lot of people do that. I certainly
Right. Yeah.
I am guilty of that for sure.
Most of the time. Yeah.
Right, right. So you have to like practice this restraint, which is really challenging to do, to not jump in and to not do the thing we always do, which is like, oh, you like baseball? I like baseball. And then like start talking about yourself. So when you're listening, there are different terms for this in psychology. It's like empathic listening or active listening, whatever it is. It's all pretty much the same. and you are listening to understand them. So if they say something you disagree with, don't fight back. Just try to understand how they got to that understanding or that belief, right? So what's their life story? Like what brought them there? Ask open-ended questions like, how did that happen, or who is that, or why did that matter, instead of questions just like, how can you be so stupid as to believe such a crazy thing, right? So you want to like draw them out, and you want people to tell you about themselves, and don't solve their problems, and don't offer advice, and just don't do all the stuff that we do, which is, it feels really unnatural
Yeah.
to cede control of a conversation like that. And for me especially, because I that's not my, I'm from like a family, or like a culture of loudmouths in Boston, Massachusetts. It's not easy to like hang back, and I live in New York, so it's like doubly bad. But but you do that, you hang back and you just listen, and you ask them open-ended questions that are just like, you're being curious and you're helping them articulate whatever it is they're trying to say. And the research shows that being listened to actually helps us think more clearly. So when they feel kind of comfortable like that, and they feel that you're
Yeah.
respecting them,
Yeah.
they'll think more clearly. They'll have a better time articulating what these feelings were. And then when it's over, they'll feel
Yeah.
connected, and they'll feel, from what I saw, like extraordinarily grateful at the opportunity to just dump this stuff out. And I thought it was going to be, on top of uncomfortable, I just couldn't imagine the type of person who was going to go do this, who was going to come over and talk to you. And it turned out that it was like a real range of people. And they told their stories. And after a little bit of suspicion at the beginning, once you reassured them that like you weren't trying to sell them something, or convert them or something, they would just go. They would just talk, and you realize that there's this really pent up demand for just for telling those stories, for like disclosing this stuff. And people don't have venues for
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And so for them, it's good because they get to actually air some of this. And for us, it's good because we get like a little tour of the life of another person, particularly when their life is very different from ours. We get a sense of what it's like to be somebody else. And for me, that's like the road to wisdom right there, right? Understanding that your reality isn't everybody's
Sure.
reality. So it ended up being amazing. I mean,
That's so true.
it was incredible. I mean, I get kind of chills even talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm not the kind of guy who would usually go for that, but it was great. But even from a practical sense, like training yourself to listen like that was super valuable. And that 80/20 thing sticks with me all the time now.
Yeah. The listening. So somebody's going to go to a networking meeting and they're going to set up this stand like you described, like the peanut stand, or who is it, the Lucy stand, right? The psychiatrist is, oh,
Right.
with
Yeah.
free listening. Someone's going to go to a networking meeting and have that. If you do, you have to give Joe Keohane credit for that, and you have to tell people to find him on Twitter, and it is at Joe Keohane, and his last name is Keohane. So I'm going to move into why don't we talk to strangers, and I'm going to read something out of the book. It's page 142. Here's what it says from the book. We know that expanding our social networks is in our nature. That's part of the appeal of the city, more people. But there's also something more personal, more intangible, that might have driven us into the gates of the city. We're talking about a city, obviously, where more than half of the world's population now resides. It's a concept in psychology that comes from an influential psychologist by the name of Arthur Aron, and it's called self expansion. Fascinating, Joe. Talk to us about that.
Yes, self expansion is this idea that there is like an intrinsic drive among humans to expand themselves, right? And the process is sort of like you're enriched by experiences, you're enriched by relationships with other people, by overcoming challenges, stuff like that, by even seeing movies that mean a lot to you, or reading books that mean a lot to you, or anything like that. That every time you do that, you internalize a little bit of that experience, and it makes you a more complex person, right? It gives you more insights into different things beyond your own life. It introduces you to questions you might not have thought to ask. Like a really good friendship. A friendship makes you grow. A really good friendship, a really good relationship makes you grow. So self expansion is that idea that it's growth basically. And there seemed to be something. There's a woman named Monica Smith who's an archaeologist who studies cities, and she made the case that there's no practical reason for humans to move to cities. Right? We had everything we needed before that. We lived kind of small agrarian villages. The villages interacted with each other enough to keep like a bit of traffic of people going, between villages, and new mates and new partners and stuff coming in. That was already happening. People were alive. People were still, we would have covered the world, not as quickly as we ended up doing, but, the species would have flourished, at least in terms of growth. And yet we chose to move to cities and like flocked to cities, even though cities, especially if you're looking at Greco-Roman times, like really dangerous, really diseased, fires, like some human suffering on an immense scale, and still people kept coming to these cities. And partly it was because of economic reasons, because there was like you can make a living there. But Aaron's idea and Monica Smith's idea is that it's that drive for self-expansion that made cities
Yeah.
really alluring to people. And Richard Sennett's a great sociologist. He made this case too, just saying like people move to cities because they want, because it allows them to create a more complex version of themselves. It allows you to,
Yeah.
gains access to things that you didn't even know you wanted, thoughts you didn't even know you needed to think, people you didn't know you needed to meet. The
Yeah.
more experiences you have and the more types of people you meet, the more complex you become because of this self-expansion idea, because you're taking bits of all these pieces. Every meaningful interaction you have takes residence in you in some degree, and it kind of stays with you. And so that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like it makes you
Yeah.
complex. And there seems to be some, humans struggle
Yeah.
with complexity too. We can be overwhelmed. We can get pretty freaked out when things don't make a lot of sense or things seem chaotic. But there does seem to be some intrinsic drive that makes us want to do that. And according to Arthur Aaron, who I got in touch with, he was like, "Yeah, strangers should do that. Conversations with strangers, as long as they're pretty good, should give you that expansion, that kind of self expansion."
None of us like extreme stress. At least I don't. I think most people don't like extreme stress.
No.
Um, but I'll ask this question this way, and you address it. So, why, when we have horrible events like September 11th, or floods, or you get the idea, it's just terrible events. Uh, why is it that nobody hesitates to talk to someone then, but when in our calm world, we'll ignore the person who's making us coffee. We'll ignore the bus driver. But in times of stress, we will talk to just about anybody, right, Joe?
Yeah, yeah. There's a guy named, oh god, I'm gonna forget his first name. I think he's dead anyway, so he's not gonna take offense. But he studied cities. A guy named Goffman, Irving or Ernest. I honestly don't remember what his name was. But he kind of in the 70s he laid out the times in which it's appropriate to talk to strangers, and he was very 1970s about it. The answer was like there are almost no times when you're allowed to talk to strangers, but one of the times was like a calamity. So if something
Yeah,
bad happened, all those barriers drop. All the things like you're
yeah,
all in it together, and the thinking behind it, you can use some kind of thinking from like urban studies and psychology and sociology. It's this idea of triangulation, where if you're experiencing the same thing at the same time, you have a relationship. So if you're at a ball game and you're watching a ball game, you can talk to a stranger more easily sitting at a ball game than you can if you're sitting on a bus. Even though you're still
yeah,
on the bus, because you can talk about the game,
yeah,
you know enough about each other that you feel comfortable talking. And in a time of calamity like that,
yeah,
all those barriers fall down, and we're experiencing this thing, and all that stuff falls away. All those inhibitions fall away. The flip side of it, though, is that when we do feel stressed, or we do feel attacked, or we are attacked, or we are under serious threat, we also tend to circle the wagons, right? So there is like a tendency to talk to strangers more
yeah,
freely in time of a calamity. But if it's like an us versus them phenomenon, it's like 9/11, you talk to anyone who lived in New York who is Muslim after 9/11, it's a whole different experience. People
yeah,
closed ranks, but then they kind of tried to
yeah,
exclude this other
yeah,
group or persecute this other group. So it's super complicated, but that definitely happens too. When we feel stressed, we tend to more tightly define our
yeah.
group, and we tend to get pretty pissed off about members of other groups. And more than pissed off, we tend to go after them sometimes. We tend to dehumanize them when we feel afraid, and that's
Yeah,
part
your
of
word
human
to use,
psychology too.
us. Yeah, you use the word us. Go deeper on what do you mean when you talk about a newer, more expansive us? Go a
Yeah.
little deeper on that.
Yeah, so I think the pessimistic reading on humans is that we're by nature xenophobic, right? That like the fact that we live surrounded by strangers today is like a fluke of history and an accident, and we're not wired for it. I wanted to demonstrate in the book, and I went pretty deep on this, deep into
Yeah.
the kind of ethnological field studies and the kind of dawn of
Yep.
humanity and apes and everything else to try to understand this. We can be really xenophobic under stress. If we're competing for resources, we can be remarkably violent and cruel and dehumanizing. But the story of civilization is the story of the other part of human psychology, which is inclusion, right? So we started out, as far as we know, we can't really know, but as far as we know, we would have been small bands of 6 to 20 people or so, small hunter gatherer bands. And, we probably could have stayed like that, but we didn't stay like that. Instead, we expanded the bands. We started forming relationships between our band and the other band, and we found ways to do it. We found kind of mechanisms to make it possible to do it safely. We started to trade, all these things started happening that allowed us to expand our conception of who we are, what our group is. And then you saw, band nexuses of like 1,000 hunter gatherers who all considered themselves part of the same group. And then you saw chiefdoms and all this stuff, cities, states, international alliances, all these things. You keep seeing over the course of human history a broader and broader and broader and broader understanding of who we are. So
Yeah.
for like Americans, although we're severely divided right now, but at our best, it's remarkable to think that 300 million people all think that they're the same people. It's crazy. It's crazy that I can travel to like Argentina and meet an American and immediately be comfortable talking to an American because we're Americans, even though we have nothing in common and we live thousands of miles away
Yeah.
from each other. It's amazing. So it is like we have the psychological capability of creating a really expansive understanding of who we are. Um, and the downside of that is that this is probably the most widely studied phenomenon in psychology is us versus them psychology. So we favor our kind, right? And it happens naturally, and it doesn't have to be violent, doesn't have to be destructive. It's just we tend to favor our own kind. And so the
Yeah.
question is, in a really diverse and increasingly globalized world, how do we expand? How do we further expand the idea of who we are? Because when we have a really exclusive idea of who we are, we tend to get very upset at the people who are not us, right? We tend to get into a lot of fights because we
Yeah.
tend to dehumanize those other people, either a little bit or a lot. So for me, the imperative is like the difficulty of living in a time when it's actually really challenging to try to, draw a bead on who are we? Like, what is my group? What group do I belong to? I'm a
Yeah.
musician, I'm a writer, I'm a Northeasterner in the US, obviously, but I'm also comfortable traveling and I can connect with those people pretty easily. And I like them. And I could, I have friends all over the place, all that stuff. There's no way for me to narrowly define who my group is. But at the same time, we
Right.
seem to have like a need to feel that we are part of a group. This is like one of our like belonging is a really important thing for people psychologically. So that's the big thing is like, how can you come up with a more expansive, more encompassing understanding of who we are to hold societies like the US together or to hold the world together, frankly?
Yeah, I think we need to do more of that. So you've been very passionate about writing the book, and so we need to wrap up, Joe. And I always feel like this is terribly unfair to an author who goes through all this work. And I know we didn't hit everything, but to kind of start to wrap up, what question didn't I ask you, or that you want to make sure we get the point across? Or in addition to that, is there something that you want to make sure that we always remember in addition to buying the book and
Sure.
sharing this interview?
Yeah, the,
So
the
go.
big the big thing is that people are really a lot of people, and not everybody, but a lot of people are really anxious about the prospect of talking to strangers, and young people especially because they don't have the practice that older people have. They've done a lot of communicating on digital devices. They haven't been like present in the world the way that we are. They have lots of other great things that they're very good at, but that's kind of like freestyle socializing is not a particular skill of theirs. So they're very anxious about talking to strangers. So the message I'd like people to walk away with is that that's really common. It's common in young people, but it's common for everybody. A lot of people are really anxious about this.
Yes.
And it can happen that
Yes.
anxiety can come from a lot of places. It can be exposure to stranger danger propaganda. Like when I was a kid, cops used to come into our classroom all the time and tell us that like everyone in the world who you didn't know was dangerous. That's a really bad thing to tell a kid because when you're in trouble, you tend to turn to
Yeah.
strangers,
Drew.
and there's no statistical basis for it. We're much more likely to
Yeah.
be killed or assaulted by people we know. So I think that plays into it. I think a lack of practice plays into it. People feel out of shape socially, and certainly after COVID, that's even worse than it was before. Social factors, racism, political polarization, that can increase the anxiety. But a lot of what you see when scientists or when psychologists interview people about why they feel uncomfortable doing this is that they just don't think they're going to be good at it. They don't think they're going to know what to say. They don't think they're going to be able to find something to talk about. They think they're going to sound ridiculous or that the person rejects them or the conversation is going to go on for 2 seconds and then they're going to have to sit there awkwardly after, or it's going to go on forever and they won't know how to get out of it. Some English people said that they were worried that once they started, they wouldn't be able to stop talking about themselves. And that was very anxiety producing to them, which is super English. Um, but the fact is,
Yeah.
like, the research is borne this out again and again and again in places from Toronto to Turkey, involving all different types of people. That when people do make the effort to do this, it tends to go much better than they thought it would. It tends to be much easier. The conversations go longer than they expected. They easily figure out something to talk about or something in common, and they come away feeling pretty good. It's just a question of getting over all these like really intense hangups that people have about doing this. And when they
Yeah.
do, it can be transformational. Again, like I'm not like I wouldn't call myself a great lover of humanity coming into this project, but it definitely made me feel a lot better about my species as a whole. It made me feel better about the world at a time when everybody feels bad about the world. So I think in that sense, it's really valuable, and it's worth the effort.
Yeah, you closed the book very passionately, Joe. I mean, you really did. I mean, you really gave us a call to action, an emotional plea. I loved the book. Again, the power. We're going to talk about the power of strangers, the benefits of connecting in the suspicious world. My guest has been Joe Keohane. His last name is Keohane. You can find him at on Twitter at Joe Keohane. Joe, you have a website also, don't you?
I do, yeah. Admittedly, bare bones website, but it's just joecohane.net. And my contact information is there. So if anyone has any really good stories or they just want to ask a question, they should hit me up. I usually respond to all my emails.
Yeah, I maybe not even should say this, but I know you've been doing. If there's some book clubs or some things like that that want to get in touch with you, and in some cases it might be worth for you to join in and join a conversation with some of those people. Is that accurate? Is that okay to say?
Yeah, hit me up. Sure.
Yeah, sure. Well, Joe, hey, thank you so much for being part of the Business Builder Show. Congratulations on a great book. I wish you much success. I know you changed me. I've been nicer the past few days. Joe, thank you so much for
That's great.
being my guest.
Thank you, buddy. I really appreciate it. It was a real pleasure.